There's a proverb my grandmother used to whisper whenever she heard of a betrayal this deep. She would say, "The lie that walks on two legs always forgets. The truth was born with four." Today, I want to tell you the story of a man who went to sea to build a future for his family. A man who sent money home every month for years. Money that was collected, spent, and never spoken of, because the woman who received it had already told his children their father was dead. She had stood at his grave, a grave with no body, and wept tears that could fill the Atlantic Ocean she had cast him into. Not with water, with a lie. For 22 years, Mezuma Chukwudi walked, breathed, and lived on the other side of that ocean, not knowing he was a ghost in his own home. But here is what I need you to understand before this story begins. The lie was meticulous. The lie was profitable. The lie gave her everything she wanted. And then, 22 years later, a 26-year-old engineer sat at a government office in Abuja with a passport renewal form and a database that should not have noticed anything, noticed everything. Stay with me, because what unraveled in that office is not just a story about one woman's greed. It is a story about what truth does when you try to bury it. It does not stay buried, it grows roots. What was in that government database, and why would it destroy everything Bisola had spent 22 years building? Stay with me. Port Harcourt, 1998. The city that sits on oil and noise and ambition, where the air smells faintly of petroleum and fried plantain at the same time, where a man with a trade certificate and a work ethic could still believe that the next contract would be the one that changed everything. Mezuma Chukwudi was 31 years old and had been married to Bisola for 4 years. He was not a man who made speeches. He was a man who fixed things, offshore oil rig machinery mostly, hydraulic systems, pressure valves, pump seals. He understood machines the way some men understand people, by listening to what they were doing wrong. He was the kind of man who kept his tools in a specific order, who called home every 3 days when he was on a rig, who brought his mother stockfish from a bar whenever he passed through and never told anyone he had done it. Bisola was beautiful, not in a quiet way, in the kind of way that made rooms turn. She had grown up in a family that had money, then lost it, and she had never forgiven poverty for the embarrassment. She married Mezuma because he was steady and had prospects. She stayed because the prospects were slow. By 1998, Mezuma had gotten a 6-month offshore contract off the coast of Angola, the best pay he had ever been offered. Enough to finish the house in GRA Phase 2 they had been building for 3 years. Enough to send their eldest son, Emeka, to a good secondary school. Enough to make Bisola stop doing that thing with her eyes when she looked at her friend Adaize's new car. He signed the contract on a Tuesday. He called home to tell her. She said, "Good, go." She did not say she was proud of him. She did not say she would miss him. She said, "Go." He told himself she was just being practical. He had been telling himself that for 4 years. But what he could not have known, what no man packing his tools into a blue metal box could have known, was that at that exact moment, something shifted inside his wife. Not into malice, not yet, into calculation. She was thinking about the life insurance policy he had taken out 6 months earlier. 12 million naira, the kind of money that could buy a different life entirely. She just needed a reason to collect it. And somewhere in the back of Bisola's mind, a reason was already forming. A reason she would spend the next 3 weeks turning into a plan. What was she about to do?
Let me tell you who Mezuma was, so you understand the full weight of what was stolen from him. He was 31 years old and had never owned a car. Not because he could not afford one eventually, because every time he got close, he chose something else first. The school fees, the roof tiles, the hospital bill for his mother's knee. Every morning on the rig, before the rest of his crew was awake, Mezuma sat on the metal deck with a cup of Nescafe and wrote in a small green notebook. Not a diary, a list. things he was going to do when he got home. Fix the kitchen sink that Bisola had been complaining about for 8 months. Take Emeda to see a proper football match. Buy his younger son, Tunde, the toy car he kept drawing pictures of in a school notebook. The green notebook was a symbolic object, his private contract with the future he was building. He had started it the day he signed the Angola contract. On the first page he had written, in his careful engineer's handwriting, 6 months away. Everything I do here, I do for them. He was 52 pages in by the time everything fell apart. He sent money home every month, routed through his colleague Bayodon's account because the direct transfer fees to Nigeria were unreasonable. He trusted Bayodon. Bayodon had been on rigs with him for 7 years. He would hand-deliver the Western Union receipt to Bisola's cousin every 4 weeks. Bisola collected it every time. She collected it for 6 months while the lie was in progress. She collected it for years after. She never stopped collecting it. On the rig, Mezuma worked 12-hour shifts and thought about the kitchen sink. He thought about Emeka's gap-toothed smile. He thought about the evening he would walk back through the gate of the GRA house, smell jollof rice from the kitchen, and know that everything he had endured out here was worth it. He did not know. He did not know that 8,000 kilometers away, his wife was sitting across a desk from an insurance broker, producing a police report, a witness statement, and a death certificate for a man who was at that moment watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean, writing in his green notebook. What was in the police report? What story did Bisola tell? And who helped her tell it? The story Bisola told was this. Mezuma had been home on a brief stopover between contracts. A lie, but unverifiable. He had gone out one evening to buy fuel and never returned. His car was found at the edge of the third mainland area of the waterfront. His wallet was inside. His phone was inside. There were signs of his struggle. The police report was filed by a sergeant named Danladi, a man whose second salary arrived in an envelope every month and asked no questions. The witness statement was signed by a neighbor named Mrs. Folake, who had been told a version of the story that stopped just before the fabricated parts. The death certificate was processed by a clerk who had been given a bottle of Hennessy, 4,000 naira, and a form that was already filled in. From beginning to end, the paperwork took 11 days. The insurance claim was approved in 6 weeks. 12 million naira deposited into an account Mezuma had never heard of. Here is the detail that tells you everything you need to know about Bisola. She kept the green notebook, not because she felt guilty, not because it held any sentimental value. She kept it because it was evidence of his handwriting in case anyone ever needed his signature on a property transfer document and asked questions. She had thought of everything. The green notebook sat in the bottom drawer of her new bedroom in the new house she bought in Lekki Phase 1 after selling the GRA property. And then the camera cuts. Cut to a 7-year-old boy named Tunde sitting at a kitchen table in a house that no longer smells of his father's engine oil. His aunt is telling him that his daddy went to be with Jesus. Tunde asks, "When is he coming back?" His aunt does not answer. Tunde asks twice more that week. Then he stops asking. That silence, that 7-year-old boy learning to stop asking for his father is the real crime. The insurance money is just money. But that boy learning to stop asking for his father is something that cannot be refunded. Mezuma is still alive on a rig in Angola. He has no idea. He is still writing in a new notebook. But something is about to go wrong with the money transfers. And that small thing will begin the first crack in Bisola's perfect lie.
8 months after the death certificate was filed, Bisola remarried. His name was Chief Adewole Salami, 54 years old, divorced, owner of 3 filling stations and a logistics company in Lagos. He had a stomach that arrived in rooms before he did, and a laugh that he deployed like a business tool. He knew Bisola had been widowed. He did not ask many questions about how. The wedding was held in a hotel in Victoria Island. 400 guests, Afro beats from a live band, a cake with 6 tires. Emeka, 14 years old, sat at the children's table in a borrowed agbada and did not eat. Tunde, 9 years old, ate everything and did not understand why his brother was crying in the bathroom afterwards. 5 years passed. Bisola drove a Mercedes. She wore senator fabric to church. She had a maid, a driver, and a prayer group she hosted every Thursday. She told the prayer group that God had restored her after great suffering. They agreed and said amen. On the rig in Angola and later Equatorial Guinea and later a platform off the coast of Gabon, Mesuma kept working. He had called home in the first weeks and gotten a disconnected number. He had sent letters through Biodun to Bisola's cousin. The cousin had stopped responding. He had assumed there was a family quarrel. He had assumed things would resolve when he returned. But when he tried to re-enter Nigeria at the end of his first Angola contract, his name flagged a hold at the immigration desk. A junior officer took his passport to a back room and came back looking uncomfortable. There was an issue with his records, they said. He would need to sort it at the state office. A man at the state office, looking at a death certificate with Miss Suma's full name and ID number on it, told him there was a mistake. Told him to come back with more documentation. Miss Suma spent 2 weeks trying to resolve it. He ran out of money. He was due back on the rig. He signed another contract to afford a lawyer who never returned his calls. He told himself he would fix it properly on the next rotation home. He said that for 12 more years. Bisola, meanwhile, had entirely forgotten about the green notebook in the bottom drawer, until the day she didn't. It has now been 14 years. Emeka is 21, studying engineering at university, and he has just found something in his mother's room that has shaken him to his foundations. What did he find? Act 5. The reckoning begins. First wave. Emeka found the notebook while looking for a pen. His mother was out. He had gone into her bedroom to use her landline charger, opened the wrong drawer, and there it was. A small green notebook with his father's name written on the inside cover in careful engineer's handwriting. Emeka Chukwudi, property of Mesuma Chukwudi. If found, please return. Emeka sat down on his mother's floor and read every page. 52 entries. His own name appeared 11 times. Tunde's name appeared 9 times. A list of school fees his father was planning to pay. A note about a toy car for Tunde. A calculation of how long it would take to finish the GRA house if the Angola contract was extended. The last entry was dated October 14th, 1998, 3 weeks before his father supposedly died. Emeka is not a man who cries easily. He sat on his mother's floor and did not cry. He put the notebook back in the drawer. He went to his room. He sat on his bed for 4 hours. Then he picked up his phone and called Biodun. He had had Biodun's number since he was 16. His father's colleague, the one who used to deliver the money transfers. He had never called it before. He had not known why he saved it. He knew now. Biodun answered on the 3rd ring. Uncle Biodun, my father, is he alive? There was a silence on the line that lasted 4 seconds. Emeka counted them. Then Biodun said very quietly, Emeka, where are you right now? Biodun knows something. He has always known something. And the fact that he asked where Emeka was instead of answering the question means the answer is not simple. What has Biodun been carrying for 14 years? Biodun had been carrying it every single day. He told Emeka everything over 3 hours in a roadside canteen in Port Harcourt. He had a bottle of malt he did not drink. His hands were still the whole time, the way hands go still when a man is confessing. Mesuma was alive. He had been alive the entire time. He worked offshore in West Africa. The last contract Biodun knew of was a platform off Equatorial Guinea. They had been in contact until about 4 years ago, when Mezuma's phone had gone silent and Biodun had not been able to reach him. He had assumed Mezuma had finally given up on Nigeria and settled somewhere abroad permanently. He had sent money home for years through Biodun's account.
Bisola had collected every transfer. I didn't know what she had done, Bildon said. Not at first. When I found out, your father had already signed another contract. He told me not to interfere. He said he was going to fix it himself when he came home. He paused. He always said that. Emeka asked one question. Do you have any contact, any old address, any company name, anything? Bildon reached into his wallet. He had kept one thing, a folded paper with the name of the offshore company Mezuma last worked for. Emeka looked at it for a long time. He was 21 years old, in his second year of an engineering degree, and his father was somewhere, maybe alive, maybe not. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He did not go home that night. He checked into a cheap guest house and sat with the green notebook and the folded paper until sunrise. At sunrise, he made a decision. He would not confront his mother, not yet. He would find his father first. He would know the full truth before he said a single word. He applied for a passport renewal that week. And that is when the government database made its first unexpected move. A passport renewal application just flagged something in the federal system, something connecting Emeka's application to his father's national ID number, and the civil servant in Abuja is about to see a data entry that should be impossible. What does the screen show? The screen showed two active records for National Identification Number 196708 JKC-MZ. Record 1, Death Certificate, issued 1999, cause of death, drowning, certified by Lagos State Registry. Record 2, active pension contribution, current, employer, Meridian Offshore Services Ltd, registered in Abuja, with offshore operations in Equatorial Guinea. Last contribution 4 months ago. The civil servant, a quiet woman named Mrs. Adora Nwosu, who had worked in the Federal Identity Office for 19 years and had the particular gift of noticing things that were not supposed to exist, flagged it immediately. A dead man had been paying into a pension fund for 22 years. She did not forward it to the standard processing queue. She sent it directly to the National Identity Management Commission Fraud Unit with a note that read, "This record requires urgent cross-verification. One of these entries is false. Please advise which." The fraud unit contacted Meridian Offshore Services. Meridian Offshore Services confirmed that employee number MO4471, name Mezuma Chukudi, had been on active contracts with the company for 18 years. He was currently between rotations. They had a contact number. The fraud unit called the number. A man answered, a man who sounded like he was sitting somewhere quiet, outside, with wind in the background. When they told him his death had been officially registered in Nigeria 22 years ago, there was a long silence. Then the man said, in a very careful voice, "I know. I have been trying to correct it since 2001. Nobody would listen." He paused. Then he said, "Who filed the death certificate? Do you have the name?" The civil servant read out, "Next of kin, Bisola Chukudi, wife." Another silence. Longer this time. "I see," he said. 2 words, but the fraud unit officer wrote in her report later that she had never heard 2 words carry so much weight. Meanwhile, in a Lagos home in Lekki Phase 1, Bisola's phone rang. It was her lawyer. He had just received a notice from a federal government body requesting documentation related to a death certificate filed in 1999. Bisola sat down. For the first time in 22 years, her hands were unsteady. Mezima is alive. The government knows it, and Bisola's lawyer just got a federal notice. But here is what nobody knows yet. Mezuma has not been informed about his sons. He doesn't know Emeka became an engineer. He doesn't know Tunde exists as the young man he is today. When father and son finally speak, what will Emeka say? The call between Emeka and his father lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. I will not give you every word of it. Some things are too private even for a story like this. But I will tell you this. Mezuma did not know his son had become an engineer. He did not know what field. When Emeka told him, offshore systems engineering, currently interning with a company that had a platform in the Gulf of Guinea, Mezuma went silent for almost a full minute. When he came back on the line, his voice was different, quieter. He said, "You chose the same work." Emeka said, "I didn't choose it. I was drawn to it. I never understood why until tonight." Here is the irony. Here is the heart of it. Bisola had declared Mezuma dead to keep wealth, status, and a second life. She had spent 22 years building a monument to a lie. She had raised her sons inside it. She had pruned every memory of their father out of their daily lives with deliberate, careful hands. But she could not prune what was in the blood. Emeka had chosen his father's world without ever knowing his father was in it. He had studied the same machines his father spent his life maintaining. He had excelled in the same technical language. He had applied to work in the same waters. He would have met his father eventually, on a platform, in a safety briefing, at a crew rotation dock. The truth had been walking toward them both the entire time. And here is the second irony, the one that cuts even deeper. Chief Adewole Salami, the wealthy husband Bisola remarried, had been pulling back from the marriage for 2 years. His children from his first marriage had contested the union from the beginning. Without his financial support, Bisola's lifestyle was quietly contracting. The Mercedes had been traded in, the maid had been let go, the prayer group no longer met at her house. Everything she had committed the fraud to secure was already leaving her, before anyone came looking. She had carried a life for 22 years, for a life that was already dissolving. The Federal Fraud Unit has now opened a full investigation. Sergeant Danladi, the officer who filed the false police report, has been summoned. The insurance company has been notified. And Emeka is driving to his mother's house with the green notebook in his passenger seat. What happens when he walks through that door? The instrument of truth in this story was not a prophet. It was a woman named Mrs. Adaora Nwosu, 53 years old, civil servant, mother of 4, who had spent 19 years in a government office that most people considered boring and irrelevant. A woman who had flagged hundreds of irregularities in her career, most of them mundane. Duplicate tax records, misspelled names on certificates, wrong dates. This one she had flagged on a Tuesday morning while eating groundnut and drinking Lipton tea. She was not dramatic about it. She did not know she was unraveling 22 years of grief. She just knew that a dead man should not have a current pension, and she did what she had always done. She wrote it down, she sent it up, and she went back to her groundnut and her Lipton tea. But it was her, the woman, who noticed. By the time Emeka arrived at his mother's house on a Thursday evening, 3 things had already happened. 1, the insurance recovery claim had come through at 22 million naira plus interest over 22 years. 2, Sergeant Danladi, now retired and living in Kaduna, had received a summons and had immediately, in the tradition of men who have been waiting for the other shoe to drop their entire lives, told investigators everything in exchange for reduced liability. 3, a lawyer from the fraud unit had called Bisola's personal number and told her that a voluntary statement given promptly and cooperatively would be noted in her file. Bisola had been sitting on her sofa for 6 hours when Emeka rang the bell. She opened the door and looked at her son. He was 26 now. He had his father's eyes, his father's stillness, and his father's habit of waiting before he spoke. He held up the green notebook. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Bisola looked at the notebook she kept for 22 years and thought no one would ever find. She looked at her son's face, and somewhere she understood that the reckoning she had been out running had finally caught up with her at the worst door. What does she do next? She sat back down on the sofa. Emeka came inside and sat across from her. He did not sit beside her, he sat across. He placed the green notebook on the table between them, and then, not in a courtroom, not before a crowd, but in a living room in Lekki Phase 1 with the ceiling fan turning and a half-eaten plate of rice on the kitchen counter, Bisola Chukwudi told the truth for the first time in 22 years. She told it in pieces at first, then in full sentences, then in the exhausted, hollow way of a person who has been rehearsing a lie so long that the truth comes out like a confession to a priest, methodical, practiced in structure, surprising in its detail. She told him about the insurance broker, about Sergeant Danladi, about the clerk and the Hennessy, about the 12 million naira and what she had spent it on. She told him she had sold the GRA house. She told him she had remarried. She told him she had, and here her voice broke for the first time, she had told them their father drowned. She said, "I told Tunde his father drowned." That sentence broke something in the room. Emeka picked up the green notebook from the table. He said, He left about Tunde's toy car. He wrote about it twice. He was planning to buy it when he got home. Bisola put her hands over her face. He said, Tunde drew pictures of that car for 3 years. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed. I found them when we moved. I did not know what they meant. I know now. He stood up. I came here for 2 reasons. 1, to give you the chance to call the fraud unit tonight, before they call you tomorrow with a warrant. 2, to tell you that your sons, both of us, will be present when our father lands in Nigeria, whenever that is, whatever condition that arrival is in. We will be there. He picked up the green notebook. He walked out. Bisola picks up the phone. She calls the fraud unit. She gives a voluntary statement that lasts 4.5 hours. But there is one person who has not yet been told the full truth, and his name is Tunde. Where is Tunde when Emeka calls him that night?
Tunde Chukwudi was 23 years old, working as a trainee accountant in Ibadan when his brother called him. He did not believe it at first. Then he did. And the believing was worse than the not believing. Because Tunde had spent 23 years grieving a man he never properly knew. He had been 7 when the lie began. He had grown up with a shape in the house where a father should have been. He had watched other boys' fathers come to school events and had learned with the careful precision of a wounded child not to let his face show anything. When he understood that his father was alive, that the shape had always been full, not empty, just hidden, he sat in his Ibadan room and did not speak for a long time. Then he said, I want to talk to him. The call was arranged through Biodun. Mezima was in a transit hotel in Malabo, waiting for his Nigerian documentation to be cleared so he could return home for the first time in over 2 decades. Tunde called at 9 p.m. He said, Dad, it's Tunde. Mezima said, I know. Emeka told me your voice. He said it sounds like mine. There is not much more to say about that call. Some rivers run too deep for narration. Now, the mercy. Emeka and Tunde had a conversation about their mother that lasted most of a night. Neither of them was willing to pretend the wound was small. Neither of them was willing to make it bigger than it was. What they agreed upon was this. They would not pursue additional criminal charges beyond what the state was already pursuing. They would cooperate with the insurance company's civil recovery. They would not attend any proceedings designed to humiliate her publicly beyond what the law required. Not because she deserved mercy, because they did not want to become men who built their healing on someone else's destruction. Their father had spent 22 years unable to come home. They would not spend 22 more locked in a courtroom. This was the mercy, and it was harder to give than any revenge. Mezima's documentation has been cleared. His flight to Lagos lands in 4 days. His 2 sons are at the arrivals gate. And in a government office in Abuja, a quiet woman named Mrs. Adewaran Wasu has just read that the case was resolved and quietly returned to her groundnut and her Lipton tea. But what happens at that arrivals gate is something none of them had prepared for. Mezima Chukwudi landed at Murtala Mohammed Airport on a Wednesday afternoon in March. He was 53 years old. His hair had gone mostly gray at the temples. He walked with the particular steadiness of a man who has spent 30 years on surfaces that move. He carried a single bag, not large. Emeka and Tunde were at the arrivals gate. Emeka was 26, in the jacket he wore to his engineering internship orientation. Tunde was 23, in a shirt that was slightly too big because he had bought it that morning in a rush and forgotten to check the size. When Mezima came through the gate and saw them, he stopped walking. He stood still for a moment, the way a man stands still when something he has been holding in his chest for a very long time is finally allowed to put itself down. Emeka stepped forward first. He held out the green notebook. He said, You left this behind, we kept it. Mezima took the notebook. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at his sons. He said, The toy car, Tunde, I wrote it down. Tunde, 23 years old, a grown man, said, I know, I drew pictures of it, I kept them in a shoebox. Mezima nodded slowly. I will find you one, he said, even now. They stood in the arrivals hall with people moving around them. Nobody took a photograph, nobody made a speech. It was just 3 men, a green notebook, and 22 years that could not be given back but could, starting now, be accounted for. As for Bisola, the insurance recovery order came through at 22 million naira, the original sum plus interest. Chief Salami had finalized the divorce 2 months prior. The Lekki house was under lien. Sergeant Dan Lottie received a suspended sentence. The clerk who had processed the death certificate had died 4 years prior, of unrelated causes, though my grandmother's proverb might say otherwise. Bisola was not imprisoned. The fraud unit accepted her cooperative statement in the civil recovery as sufficient. She lives now in a 1-bedroom flat in Ikorodu. She attends a church there, smaller than the old one. She does not host Thursday prayer groups anymore. She sent a letter to her sons. 1 letter to both of them. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked only that she understood what she had done. Emeka kept the letter. Tunde did not read it. Neither decision was wrong. There is one more thing. One last thread that tied itself quietly, without ceremony, in a government office in Abuja, and it involves Mrs. Adewaran Wasu, a woman who never knew what she started. What did she do when she read the final case report? Mrs. Adawaran Wasu read the final case report on a Friday afternoon. She read it the same way she had flagged the original record, quietly, without drama, at her desk with her Lipton tea. When she finished, she wrote one note in the case margin, in the neat bureaucratic script she had used for 19 years. Record corrected, deceased status reversed, verified living, file closed. She filed it. She went home. She told her children at dinner that she had had an interesting week at work. She did not tell them the details. She is not that kind of woman. But somewhere between the flagging and the closing, a man had come home. 2 sons had a father. A 22-year lie had been measured, weighed, and found to be exactly as destructive as all lies of that size eventually are. And here is what the elders say about this story when they tell it now in the places where it has spread. And it has spread, the way true stories always do, from person to person, from city to city, from one shocked WhatsApp forward to another. They do not say, what Basola did was unforgivable. They say, look at what she built. Look at what the children built beside it, without knowing. And look at which one was still standing when the truth came home. Emeka is a senior offshore engineer now. He works platforms in the Gulf of Guinea. Sometimes on night shifts, he calls his father, who consults part-time for a training company and lives in a small house in Port Harcourt that he is very slowly fixing up. The kitchen sink, he said, was the first thing he fixed. Tunde visited last Harmattan. He brought his girlfriend. He and Mazuma sat outside until 1 a.m, doing nothing in particular, just sitting. The green notebook is on a shelf in Mazuma's living room. It is not closed. He added new pages. Page 53 reads, Things I did not miss. The boys became men, good men, without me, in spite of everything. Page 54 reads, I owe them that. I owe them every day I have left. This is the story of Mazuma Chukwudi, a man who was declared dead and refused by the simple act of continuing to live and work and write in a notebook to stay that way. The truth does not stay buried, it grows roots, and when it finally breaks the surface, it does not break it gently. But for those who are innocent, for the children who drew pictures of toy cars and school notebooks and learned too early to stop asking, it breaks toward the light. My name is your narrator, and that is the story I was asked to tell today. If it moved you, share it, because this is how the elders said stories were meant to travel, not from one mouth to one ear, but from one heart to many.